Welcome back. Let's now finally learn something new in CSS, which is exactly why you came to this course, right? Now, as in all my other courses, in all the coding lectures, I always have this slide called What You Will Learn in This Lecture. And I have found that students really appreciate this quick lecture summary, so that they can later come back to the lecture and know if it contains exactly what they are looking for or not. And that's why I decided to continue this tradition in this course. So in this lecture, you're going to learn the best way to perform a basic reset using the universal selector, and how to set up project-wide font definitions. This might not be really new to you, but we still have to do this whenever we start a new project. Now, what probably is new to you is to clip parts of elements using the new clip path property. And so that's the first real new modern CSS you're going to learn. So let's do that right now. Alright, so we're back in the code editor that I showed you before. So in this screen we have always the code editor, and then I have here another screen on the side where I keep the web page open so we can check on the work that we've been doing. Now this here is the final web page that I also will keep open as a reference so that we can see always what to do next. And so let's now actually open the website, the document that we're going to work on. So it's this index.html, of course, in the project folder. So in my case, it's on the desktop, but maybe in your case, it's somewhere else. But let's go open this index.html file for now. And of course, it's still empty because we didn't write any code yet, right? Now later on, we're going to open this index.html in a slightly different way. So we're basically going to create a small local web server. But for now, this works just fine. All right, so let's go back now to the editor. Now to start, let's write the HTML for the header element. So just for this here, this part, this green big element. So all of this will be our header. But for now, we're only going to concentrate on the background image and on making this shape here, okay? So that's what we're going to focus on in this lecture. So we're going to use the HTML5 header element, and we're also going to give it a class called header. If you're wondering why we're giving it a class name instead of just selecting it in the CSS using the header element selector, it's because we want a class name on each and every element here in the HTML. But we're going to talk a bit more about CSS architecture later in the course, where all of this will make sense. Okay, and just for now, let's simply put some text here. So some text, and that's enough for the HTML for now. Remember, we just want this big box with the background image and the color and then that shape that we just saw, okay? So let's now head over to our CSS file and start writing some CSS. Now the first thing I'm going to do is to perform a basic reset. And maybe if you took my other CSS course, then you might remember that I used something called normalize.css in order to make a cross-browser reset. So in order to make every browser render the page in the exact same way. Now doing so is still valid, but I have found that browsers are actually getting better and better and more consistent in the way that they render a website. And so that's no longer really necessary. And so I don't do it anymore. And so let's just do a simple reset using the universal selector. So just like this. So the universal selector will select each and every element on the page and then apply these declarations here to it. So we want a margin on all of them of 0 pixels, and of course also a padding of 0. So by default, browsers apply a certain margin or a certain padding to some elements. Like for example, an H1 element, so the main heading, there's always some margin in it, and we don't want any of that. So this allows us basically to start clean, without the browser adding any margins or paddings that we don't want to our elements. Now another thing that we're going to do is to set the box sizing property to border box. So border box. And if you're not familiar with box sizing border box, what this does is to change the box model so that the borders and the paddings are no longer added to the total width or the total height that we specify for a box. So without this, any paddings and borders are added to the height or the width of an element, which really isn't helpful for us. And so with this, we're getting rid of that behavior. All right, and next, let's set some overall font properties for the entire web page. And this time we're not going to do it in the universal selector, but in the body element selector. And why do we do it this way? Well, we do it because the properties related to font are usually inherited. So we're using the power of inheritance here. And I'm going to explain everything there is about inheritance in the next section. So we have a whole lecture just about inheritance in CSS. But what you need to know for now is that we set, for example, the font family on the body element, which is basically the parent element of all the other elements. And then this font family will get inherited by all the child elements of the body. Okay? And doing it this way is actually more efficient, and it's a better practice than to just put all of this in the universal selector up here. Okay, so we never do that. Everything related to font, we always specify it here in the body selector. So we set the font family to Lato, and if that's not available, then just some sans serif. Okay, and I can use Lato because I already included it here in the HTML. So as I said in the beginning, this comes from Google Fonts, and it's a font that I have already included. So if you're not familiar with this, it's really simple. You can just go to Google Fonts and find it out. Okay, so I included Lato with the font weights of 100, 300, 400, 700, and 900. So let's set the overall font weight to just 400. Font weight 400. Also, the overall font size should be 16 pixels, and the line height of, let's say, 1.7. So basically line height 1.7 means that it's 1.7 times bigger than the predefined line height that we would have without this. Okay, so we're using 16 pixels here for now, but we're actually going to change this later to use a better technique. But for now, let's go with these pixels. Okay, something else we can set here is the overall text color, which I'm sure you also know how to do it, and it's just color. And then the color that I chose for this text is this gray 777. Okay, and here in my text editor, I actually have an extension which then nicely highlights the color. So this is how the color looks like. So this gray 777. It also does it up here in the comments. So these are the greens, and you can already see how they look like because of what this extension does. So, and with this code, we just performed a basic reset, and we also set the project-wide font definitions here in the body selector because they will all be inherited to their child elements. Okay, and with that in place, let's start formatting the header element. And remember, it has the header class. So we use the class selector and then header. And let's just create some space here. Okay, so let's start by defining the height, and let's set it to 95 VH. And in case you're not sure what this does, is basically we say that at every point the height of this box, of this element, should be 95% of the viewport height. Now we could put 100 here, then the element would always be exactly the same height as the viewport, but I chose to go with 95 to make it not 100%, but only almost 100%. Okay, and let's now set the background image. So I start typing background, but instead of having to write all the way until background and then image, I can just start writing image right now, because the text editor will recognize that I'm looking for background image. You see, it already recognized that that's what I want. And this will also work in your text editor. So you can just do the same, and you don't have to write all the code like background image, but instead just back EMG and then it works. So press enter and that's it. Now the background image that we want is here in the image folder. So it is called hero, I think. Yes, so that's the one we want, right? You see, it's this one here. Okay. And we specify an image by writing URL and then specifying the path to the image. Now we're currently in the CSS folder, so we first have to go one folder up to go into the project folder, and so it's .. / then img, so image, and then the name of the image, hero.jpg. And that's it. So again, we were here in the CSS folder, and we went one level up to go into the project folder, so the natives folder here. And then from there we went into the image folder and then hero.jpg. And now something else we should do is to set the background size to cover, which I'm sure you're also familiar with. So again, I do this trick. I just write back, and then I start writing size. So return, and that's it. And cover is what I want here. And what cover does is that whatever the width of the viewport or the element, it will always try to fit the element inside of the box. So let's now take a look on what that looks like. So this one is it, refresh, and here we go. So our background image, it adapts nicely to the viewport, I hope, and yeah, it does. And you see here this white bar, it's the remaining 5% of the viewport height. So 100% would fill everything, 95 fills just up until this point. And also here you can see the text, the some text that we put, and it's already styled with the Lato font family with the gray color and the 16 pixels in size. Now something else we could do here is to set the background position. So background position, and we can set it to top. So let's see what that does. So it looks like it did nothing, but actually it does, because what it does is to ensure that whatever the viewport size is, that this top of the image here always stays at the top of the container. So you see now here, as we go up, the bottom of the image gets cropped, but the top of the image stays the same, right? So it's this what I'm talking about. Now we could change it, so let's actually use the dev tools here right now, because this is a fundamental part of being a web developer, is using these Chrome dev tools. So let's see what it would look like if we set it to bottom. So now what happens is that the bottom stays the same as we change the image size. So the bottom stays the same and it changes up there. Now what we also can do is to set it to center. Okay, and so what it will do now is to always stay at the center. And so it will now probably crop out at the top and at the bottom. So you see? Yeah, that's what happens now. So basically it's in the middle here now where it stays the same, but at the bottom and the top it is cropped out, you see? Alright, but we of course want it at the top. Okay, next up we want that nice green gradient all over the image. And how do we do that? We use background image again, because to specify gradients we always use the background image property. Now we already have the background image property here with the image. So what can we do? We simply specify a second one. And what we do is to use the comma. Now we want the background to stay on top, and so it actually has to be the first background image that we specify. So we put our gradient here and then comma the image. Okay, so let's put actually the linear gradient here. So linear gradient and then the colors that we want. And we actually have the colors up here. So we start with the light green on one side. So I paste it here and then comma, and on the other side the dark green. Okay, makes sense. So we have basically two background images, one on top of the other. The first one is the linear gradient going from this color to this color, and then after that, so basically below that, is this hero image. Now another parameter that we can specify in the linear gradient is basically to where the gradient should go. So we can say to right. And so now CSS understands that it should start on the left side and go to the right. So let's see if that worked. Can close the dev tools and then reload. And yeah, that's it. So we have the gradient going from the left side with the first green, the lighter one going to the right side with the darker green. Now we could also say to top or to button or to left. And we can also do something else, which is specifying two directions. So we say to right, bottom. And so now the gradient will go to the right bottom corner, starting probably at the left top, right? So let's see if that's what happens. And yeah, I hope you saw it change. So now it goes from here all the way there. So only one thing left to do is to actually make the image below it visible, right? And how can we do that? Yeah, we have to change the opacity of these colors, okay? And so in order to do that, I can actually use the built-in color picker that I have here. And I'm sure that your text editor, if you're not using Visual Studio Code, will do the same. So I just have to pull down this slider here, then until it gives me an opacity of 0.8, okay? I'm sure you're familiar with this RGBA syntax. So basically RGBA means that we have here the R, G, and B, so red, green, and blue. and then the opacity value in the end. Okay, and this color picker does this conversion automatically. So we no longer can use this hexadecimal notation here, so 28B for 85, but we have to change to RGBA. Okay. So I'm putting 80 here. So basically 80% of the color is visible. So if we went down here to like 10%, then it will be almost transparent. But we want 80% here. So this looks a bit confusing here. So let's actually clean this up a bit. So each argument has its own line. And then also this one on a separate line so that it's easier to read a little bit. Okay, so again, we have two background images. First, this gradient going to right bottom with these two colors, and then the image below that. So let's see if that's the effect that we want. And yeah, that's pretty much how we want it to look like. So let's check. Yeah, that's actually almost what it looks like. You see this small white thing here, this small white border that goes around this entire web page. You see, is actually also here. You can see that here it's light gray, but here it's white. So this white thing goes around the entire web page. And I think it gives everything a very nice look. And so let's do that as well. And it's actually really easy. All we have to do is to put a padding around the entire body. So padding 30 pixels. So the body element contains the entire web page. And so if we set a padding here, then this padding will get applied on the entire web page. Just like this. So here we go. That's our 30 pixel padding here around the web page. Okay. So note that this is not a case of inheritance like we had here, because the padding is not getting inherited. All that's happening is that it's applying a 30 pixel padding around the entire body. Okay. All right. And now the last piece of the styling that we want to do for the header. So what we want is now this kind of wedge that we can see here. And what this is to simply clip out this part of the image that would otherwise be here. Okay. So let's now do that. And for that, we use the really modern CSS property called clip path. So clip path. And what we do in here is to specify a polygon in which the image or the element will still be visible. So we use the polygon function. So polygon, and in here we define a bunch of coordinates which define this polygon. So for now, let me just put some placeholders here like x and epsilon, and we're going to specify these later on. Okay, x and epsilon. But first we need to take a look at the image to see how it actually should work. So this is our image, and this is how we want the final version to look. All right. So what are the 4 coordinates of this polygon where we want the element to still be visible? It's this one here, right? So we're going to start here, this one, then here this coordinate, then this one, this corner, and then finally this one. And so all we need is to specify these 4 corners in order to obtain this polygon. And we're going to start here at the top left corner and then move clockwise. So this one first, then this one, then the third one, and then the final one. So in relation to this point here, where do we want the first point to be? We want it to be exactly here, right? So we don't want to move it anything in the x-axis. So it's just like this. This is x. And we don't want it to move in the epsilon axis. So also not this way. So it's just 0, 0. We want it to stay in the same place. So 0 and 0. Okay? So in the x direction, we don't want it to change. And in the epsilon direction, we also don't want it to change. So let's now take a look at the second point. So this one here. So counting from here, from the left side, we want it to change in the x direction, right? So all the way until this point, we want the polygon to go, right? And so what is this point here? How far away is it from the left side? We can simply say it's 100%. So it's going to be 100% of the width of this element away from the left side, from here. Okay? So we can just say that x should be 100%. And now epsilon in the epsilon direction, we don't want to change it at all, right? Okay, and now the third coordinate is this one. So it's the same in the x direction, right? So it's still 100% in the x direction, but now the epsilon is what changes here. So let's just put some random number there, okay? So x is still the same 100%, and now from the top, we want it to be at some point. Let's just say 50%. Or we could also specify this in pixels or in any other unit that we want. So for example, I can say 200 pixels, okay? All right, and now the last coordinate is this one here, the fourth. So in X, we're back to 0 here, right? Because remember that this side here is the reference. And so we don't move anything in the X direction, so this way. We did move, however, in the epsilon direction. So going from here, we did all the way down to the end of the element. So we want 100%. So in X, it's 0, and in epsilon, it's 100%. And that's it. So let's see if this actually worked. And now, here it is. All right, great. So these are the 200 pixels that we specify here in this coordinate for the epsilon direction. Let's now inspect this element. And we can now change here some stuff so that you can see how this changes. So imagine that here for the second coordinate, so this one here, we wouldn't put 100 pixels, but let's say, we wouldn't put 100%, but we would put, let's say, 500 pixel. Okay, that makes sense, right? Because we have 500 in the X direction and 0 in the epsilon direction. We can also change that, of course. Let's say we have 100 pixels here, then it looks like that. All right. Now what I want you to try here is to make a triangle of this, okay? I'm pretty sure that after this explanation you should already understand how it works, right? So try to pause the video and try to do a triangle here, okay? So did you manage to make it work? This is how I would do it. So let's just get rid of all of this. And now the first coordinate should be here in the center, right? So we have X 50% and on epsilon 0%, right? And now we want this bottom corner here. So X is 100% and epsilon is also 100%, right? And now finally it's this bottom corner here. And so here we have X 0 and epsilon is 100%. So 0 and 100%. And here we go. So here we have our triangle, right? So if you want to make a triangle, it's like this. Now you can do lots of different things with this. And there's actually a very cool tool, which is called the Clippy, this one here. And I'm going to put it on my resource reference page so that you can check it out later. And here you just need to click on one of these. Let's say we want a right arrow like this, okay, to get a bit crazy. And then all we have to do is to copy this CSS code here. Now let's just copy these numbers because we already have the clip path property written out, right? Just to make a final test, final experiment. All right, so it works like this, okay? So now we have an arrow. Okay, but we don't want any arrow. We just want our element to look like in the example page. And so here what we will do is not to specify a percentage, but the unit of viewport height, such as we did here for the height of the element. And so in here I will say 75% of the viewport height, okay? So let's look how this looks like now. And that's it. So now if we change the viewport height, it will also change dynamically this little interval here, right? And if I close this completely, then it looks like this, and it looks the exact same way as our original, right? See? That's how it looks like. Awesome. So I know this is a bit complicated to understand, this clip path property and the polygon we have to write, but try to wrap your head around it, and then it's actually not so complicated. So I hope that this first coding lecture of the course was quite fun and that you already learned something new here. We're already making great progress, and to continue with this header, just come with me right to the next lecture. See you there.